This is the Leader Lift podcast, taking your leadership from one peak to the next. This podcast is for you, the leader, no matter what stage your leadership is at.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Leader Lift podcast. I'm Mike Kai, your host. Join me as I drop leadership tips and have insightful conversations with leaders from around the world. I'm so glad that you joined me today. Take a moment and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. Now, let's jump into this week's episode and take your leadership to the next peak. Hey everybody, welcome to the Leader Lift podcast, soon to be rebranded as the Pound for Pound podcast. Based upon my book, The Pound for Pound Principle. Go to mikekai.tv and you should get this book, and as well as the 16 masterclass videos that are brand new, different from anything that I've ever done. But I want to welcome this next podcast. My podcast is with a very good friend of mine, and his name is Pastor Steve Kelly from Virginia Beach, Virginia, and so many campuses all over Virginia and even in California. And I actually think you're gonna love this. You know, in this session, I get to talk to Pastor Steve about his intentionality of raising leaders, leading the next generation, and the impact that the Australian and American church has had on each other and the world. I really believe you're gonna enjoy this one. Please give a warm welcome in your hearts to one of the great pastors in the world, Pastor Steve Kelly from Wave Church in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Hey everybody, I want to welcome my really good friend, Pastor Steve Kelly from Virginia Beach, Virginia, of the incredible Wave Church and the Wave Collective. And everybody, let's welcome him to the podcast. Welcome, Steve.
Hey Mike, it's good to be with you, my friend.
It's always great to see you. I love your countenance. I love your personality. You walk into a room, you light it up, even unintentionally, because of just who you are. And I just want to thank you for being a great friend to me and Lisa. You and Sharon are some of our most favorite people. And I sometimes I can't believe the people that God has brought into my life, and you're definitely on the top of that very short list of people I'm so grateful and so thankful for. So Steve, thank you so much. Tell us how things are going in Virginia Beach and all of the campuses that you have in Great Neck and so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, we're doing good. Actually, it's been a great year for us. It's obviously, this is a year like no other. You know, who's ever seen a year like this? I don't know that. I hope and pray we don't see another one in the next 2 decades ever.
Yes.
But yeah, we're having a good year. It's you know, we're busy. I actually am finding myself right now really trying to make sure that I'm just putting my time and effort and energy into the things that are going to be productive, that are meaningful. I'm on this warpath of busy, and my life is, I'm already busy enough. I don't need to be adding more to my life unless I really feel like it's God, because we've got Wave Church and we've got all of our locations. We've got our collective. We've got our conferences. We've got Wave City Care, our nonprofit community engagement arm. We've got, you know, Wave Leadership College. Yep. We've got the Wave Children's Learning Center, and we've got all these campuses where we're acquiring and buying buildings, and we got a vision to have 20 Wave campuses. So I'm actually just right now, Wave Church for me is about where do I put my time and energy to create and fulfill the mission of the church. And I'm having to say no to a whole lot of other stuff so I can say yes to that.
Wow. Yeah. You're one of the most focused guys that I know. When you think about, you know, Wave Church goes all the way from the West Coast to the East Coast at the very least. I'm sure you probably have more plans than that, but from Hermosa Beach all the way to Virginia Beach, seems like you got the beaches locked in, right?
Well, we are in Wilson and Greenville too, which are two, like Greenville's a big college city in North Carolina, but really what is major about Greenville is the college. And it's a country town, and so is Wilson. So I like the fact that we're kind of everywhere. Right. But yeah, I'm looking for those strategic cities that I really feel like, and I'm a beach guy, man. I'm telling you, my 2 favorite words in the world: Wave, church. I love the beach and I love the church.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, I can see Pebble Beach. I can see Palm Beach, Florida. Just throwing it out there. Just throwing it out there.
Amen.
Amen. Hey, Steve. So what I love about a lot of the things about your leadership is I love to see the young
crop of leaders that are around you, your campus pastors, your sons in the faith. Talk to us a little bit about that, about how did that come about, or what is your intentionality with raising up young couples or young men, especially when it comes for the ministry and future campus pastors?
I guess, Mike, for me, I had the privilege, I got saved in a church in Sydney, Australia, where there was a great, great man of God called Pastor Gordon Gibbs. And he was like, I don't know how to describe him. He's like Mr. Pentecost in Australia back in the 70s and 80s. And I got saved in 81. And he took a shine to me. And he was old then. And he had already transitioned the church on to the new senior pastor who I loved and served, I was in that church for 10 years. But this old guy called Gordon Gibbs just said to me, you're a spiritual son in the Lord. And he mentored me and he prophesied over me and he moved in signs and wonders. And I'll never forget, and I don't want to say this rudely, but why would this old guy even take an interest in someone like me? But he saw something in me and he believed in me and it made me feel so good. And then I think about Frank Houston. He did the same thing. He used to look at me and say, young man, there's something on you. And he'd always come and talk to me. And then a guy called J. Oswald Sanders, who wrote one of my favorite books called Spiritual Leadership.
That's right, really?
Yeah, and he said, and I wrote to him and said, I want to reprint your book because it was out of print. I'll pay for it. And I'll put it in our college. This is back in Hillsong College. And when I did that, he came out to meet me. And I'll never forget again, he took a genuine personal interest in me. And I'm thinking, who am I that he would believe in this young guy? And all of a sudden, in our college, and I go, what are you doing here? J. Oswald Sanders, what are you doing? He goes, I'm just checking on my spiritual son to make sure you're not preaching any heresy. And I teach Moving in the Spirit at Hillsong Conference. And who's on the front row listening and taking notes? Gordon Gibbs. On me. And I used to think to myself, and I remember thinking, I want to make sure I'm the guy that believes in the next generation like these men believed in me. And so that was probably one of the most significant influences in my life. And so now I've got these campus guys and they're all in their, they were in their 20s and 30s. I think maybe one or two of them have made it into the old age of in their 40s. Maybe one of them's in their 40s. The rest are all in their 20s and 30s. And I love it. I love the fact that they're young, they're visionary, they think they're unbreakable, they're teachable. I love, for me, my greatest goal is what can I impart into this leadership pool that I believe will outlive me. And obviously I know they'll outlive me, but I think this, Mike, I think this is really important to me. For me, what matters is I'm not the talking head. I know who I am. I know my voice and I know I'm the face of Wave Church, but my definition of success is a successful transition and that this continues on. And I'm looking at these young guys and I'm letting them preach in their campuses on 3 out of the 4 Sundays a month. And I'm preaching live in all their campuses on the first Sunday of the month. That takes a lot of listening to their sermons, training them, making sure they're theologically grounded, making sure they've got the people skills they need, all those things. But I love that. I love raising up. And I got another guy called Mark Hopkins who on a day-to-day basis, he pastors them and makes sure they don't get errant doctrinally. But I'm not the guy that just says, I'm not the talking head. I have to speak live in every campus. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just got to figure out how you're wired. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I guess because I grew up under Brian, I watched Brian do that so brilliantly, raising up another generation of leaders. And I thought, that's me. That's my style.
So good. So good. It's really, and also can be tempting in a season like this to not go with that, to go, wait, let me grab it right now. Let me stabilize things. But you're not doing that. You're still doing that in some sense, but you're still releasing and open-handed with all the guys.
Now we do obviously oversee all the finances through one church, one eldership, one oversight.
Right.
And that's obviously very carefully monitored. But in terms of leading and growing the campus, it is them preaching there. And we just make sure that we've got the best business practices, the right commitments of a lease or a building or the acquisition of a building, so that, you know, I love to teach giving out of inspiration and not out of perspiration. I don't want to be sweating it. I don't want to be I got margins for all the campuses about what their thresholds are as to when they can bring in more staff and when they can increase to their staff, margins on all of that. And that's all, if you like, centrally governed, but it actually frees them up not to have to worry about that stuff. They can just concentrate on growing their campus.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. What I love about your leadership is it is open-handed, free, empowering, but at the same time, you've got margin and constraints to make sure that if you could, all you got to worry about is growing your campus. I'll take care of the finances. It's not unlimited. I'm not the master of coin. I can just give you, you can come and grab money anytime you want. But at the same time, you're free to have vision, to dream about your campus, what that could look like, how you can reach more people. I love that. When I think about your son Josh and your son Sam in Dallas, I think would you say that has a lot to do about how you lead that generation as well?
Josh and Sam, and I'd say Alyssa, and Alyssa works for me. She's my personal assistant. Jared works for me. That's Alyssa's husband. He's our Norfolk campus pastor. Josh runs Great Neck, which is our broadcast main campus. What I love about them is they grew up in church life, and I'll give them all the credit. They made good decisions. I won't take all the credit. People are very kind to me about, you've raised good kids. And I say that's as much by the grace of God and their decisions. All I want to make sure is I wasn't the reason why they weren't going to be serving God. And but I will say this, as they grew up in church life, they have strong opinions about things they think. And I'd allow them to tell me what they think about church life. And now he's Josh running our main campus. And I got to tell you, sometimes we butt heads because I find myself going, no. And yet if I'm going to get him to run the campus, I got to let him run the campus. But everything they're saying to me is out of a jealous motivation for the next generation. And so sometimes I got to go, hey man, listen, no, back off. I've heard you, but that's far enough. I would say most of the time, if not all the time, but most of the time I got to let him lead this thing. And I've got to take a step back, but I know everything he's saying to me is out of a jealous passion and a zeal. And sometimes I just got to remind him, hey, and he's getting good at this. It's the whole church, not just the next generation. And we got to take people through this, and he's getting very good at it. So yeah, and there's words that I'll say that they say, you can't use that word anymore. You can't have that leadership. It's a different day. It's a different era. And they do a good job loving me, and yet lovingly say to me things that they go, you don't understand how much that's disconnecting with another generation.
Well, I've spent time with them away from you at the hotel or whether at dinner, and the way that they speak about you while you're not there is very, very honoring and very, very son-like about a father. And I love that. I love that about it. Steve, when I think about this, I think about your leadership, how you were raised up and how you're raising up young men as well, and how you're passing it on to the next generation. I think one of the things I'm thinking about is people right now who may not be acquainted with you yet, and you will be, everybody. You got to go to his website and listen to his messages. You got to get Pastor Steve's book called Don't Tell Me. This is terrible. Spiritually Transmitted Disease. No, not that one. That's Mark Ramsey. Wait. What? Say it to me. The Accent of Leaders.
Spiritually Transmitted Diseases. Who wrote that book?
That's Mark Ramsey. Oh
my God.
Steal it. You got STDs.
Hey, can I tell you something real funny? I just came back from Australia one time. I was totally jet lagged, off my face, tired, and I'm in church. And to be honest with you, I was in la la land. I was just, you're in a fog,
Yeah.
We always promote a book and say, hey, here's a book we'd encourage you to read. And this one book was on the table, and I picked it up, and I didn't even look at it. I went, here's Joyce Meyer. She's got a book called 101 Ways How to Uncomplicate Your Life. And then I'm jet lagged, and I look at that and I go, well, that's the most ridiculous title for a book I've ever heard. 101 Ways How to Uncomplicate Your Life. I said, that sounds very complicated. There's 101 ways. So I totally started bagging this really good book, but I'm doing it because I'm just totally jet lagged. I don't know what I'm saying. It was probably the worst selling book in the history of Wave Church. Like when he said spiritually trained, by the way, I'm sure Mark Ramsey's a friend of mine, and I'm sure it's a great book.
Oh no, it's a great book. It's a great book. He's got so many good things about it, and that would be like, it would be like gossip. It would be dishonor. It would be really, really good book. I mean, it could be a 12-week series. But I apologize for getting the titles mixed up, and maybe I need some sleep. But I'm thinking The Accent of Leadership and The Accent of Leadership. And you got to get that book, everybody, The Accent of Leadership. And my staff has all read it, and I think the rest of them need to read it again. But think about this. Your accent is the accent of the Southern Hemisphere. Seems to be one of the greatest accents of leadership going on right now. What comes out of your mouth, how you say what you say, but also Australia, New Zealand, some of the great pastors on the globe right now are coming to, in my opinion, for the last 20 years or so, have come from Australia. Tell us, are you Australian? You American? You're American Australian? What are you, Pastor Steve?
Oh, Mike, I mean, I have the most Australian accent you're ever going to hear, right? So I was born in Queens, New York, and lived there till I was 8 years of age, and then moved to Australia. Lived in Australia from when I was 8 till when I was 35. And then really just knew God had called me back to the United States. Got saved when I was 17, and that's when I learned that burden doesn't necessitate timing. And even though I knew I was going to go live in America again one day, and by the way, when I was 8 leaving America as a little boy, standing at JFK Airport, I vowed in my heart, one day I'm coming back to America. I didn't want to leave America, but I knew my parents needed to and wanted to. But that was their problem. I'm just caught up in it because I'm the kid. And then when I was 12, they asked me, do you want to become an Australian citizen? I said, does that mean I'd lose my American citizenship? And they said, yes, it would, because that's what it meant at the time. And I said, well, then I don't want to be an Australian citizen. And then when I was 17, I got saved, and I went, oh, now I know why. It's not just a little boy just trying to move back to America. And by the way, I loved every day in Australia. And there are plenty of things I miss about Australia. But I realized, no, I'm called to be in America one day. And then when I was in that church for 10 years, and then I went and worked with Brian over at Hillsong Church for another 8-9 years, I remember saying, look, I'll come for 2 years, but I know God's called me to America. And of course, 8 years later, I'm the associate pastor. I'm looking after so much of what is Hillsong Church in those days. But I always knew I'm called to the East Coast as to where I'd live, but to have an influence across the whole continent of the United States of America, across the whole of America. And so, yeah, I'm an American citizen with an Australian accent. You're right, Mike. There are some amazing things coming out of Australia. There is something of a move of God, a breath of God. It's in the worship. It's in the preaching. It's in the leadership. And it is definitely touching the world and being a blessing to the body of Christ. But I got to tell you something. The Australian church is where she is today because of the influence of the church in the United States and pastors who've come and trained and taught us and influenced us to think bigger and braver and stronger. Don't apologize for having a big vision. Australians needed to hear that. And so I think that's how the body of Christ works.
Steve, tell us, who are those pastors that went to Australia, New Zealand, and imparted that? Who are those American pastors?
Oh, it's been over decades, Mike. I can only speak in my own point of reference. I remember back in the day in just being a pastor, young pastor, and having American guest ministry come into Australia, which, by the way, you think about for someone to travel that far, that's a long way. There's plenty of people. I mean, in my world, in the church in Penrith, we had American pastors coming through that would just help us get a bigger view of church world, and they'd come in and preach. And it wasn't just the fact that they preached a sermon, it's the world that they lived in that enlarged us. And I'm going to have blanks now. The pastor used to come into Penrith, and I can't remember his name because I was just a young guy. He pastored, is it Melody Land in California somewhere?
I forget his name, but
Roy Hicks Jr. would come.
Roy Hicks Jr.
Yeah, I remember he would preach
Foursquare guy.
Yeah, he would come.
Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. And then books that were written. Dick Eastman, learning how to pray. Yeah. Back in the day, guys like Larry Lee and that would come and just, I'm thinking of people. You're asking me. Then, of course, there were, with the Hillsong, we had a guy called Pastor Casey Treat that taught us renewing the mind and excellence. And it transformed. Brian will be the first to tell you. It transformed Brian's life. Now, that transformation in Brian's life transformed that church, but that's a church that is transforming the nation of Australia. And now, as we know, Hillsong Global all over the world. So guys like Casey Treat, Rick Godwin, Ray McCauley in South Africa that came and invested. There's so many people, Mike, and it's a great global exchange, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it. I love that. But the other thing is, when I was looking for vision, or I was looking for something, and here in Hawaii, in the middle of the Pacific, you're part of the. You're not necessarily always feeling like a part of the upper 48. You've got Alaska and 49 and Hawaii number 50, and great churches here, incredible churches. Art Sepulveda with Word of Life, and then you had Pastor Wayne Cordero with New Hope, who probably had pastored the largest church in Hawaii since the Great Revival in the 1800s, which is incredible. And this is the 200-year anniversary of the Great Awakening, actually, in Hawaii. That Elmer Towns actually compared it as one of the top 10 revivals in the history of the world that happened here in Hawaii in the 1800s, like 1855. No, it can't be. It had to be 1820 because it was the 200-year anniversary of the gospel coming to Hawaii. And my pastor, Ralph Moore, who was a prolific church planter, but it was in the Jesus movement. So it was more, I came out of the pastor who got pastored during the Jesus People movement. So it was Chuck Smith era, great Bible teaching, come as you are. And I don't want to put it down, but it would say like maybe low quality, let's make disciples, just make disciples. Yeah. And so all of those different streams. And until somebody told me, said, Mike, you ever been to Hillsong Conference? And I said, no, I've never gone. He said, do you want to go? I said, I'd love to go, but isn't that all music? He says, no, it's not all music. It's great, got great leadership. And that's where I met you. And that's where I met Paul DeYoung. Yeah. And you're both on my senior advisory committee. And that's where I got exposed. And I think that definitely opened up my eyes and opened up my world to what it is today. And I consider Wave, Hillsong, Life, New Zealand, that have been some of the biggest, hands down, right, Clint, impacts on Inspire Church and who we are today. And so you're so right. You have to venture out and get exposed to where a move of God is happening. And that was imparted onto me. And, you bring up Roy Hicks Jr. I never had the privilege of meeting him, but he was Pastor Ralph's, one of his very good friends. And that guy was a general, from what I understand. The legend of Roy Hicks Jr. before he died in that tragic plane crash coming home from Los Angeles, trying to get to his family in Eugene. If they say he fell asleep or the fog was just too thick and he lost his way. But before that, the men from the Faith Center I got old tapes of Roy Hicks Jr.
Yeah.
preaching, and you know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna translate it, download it, get it from tape to a download format, and send that to you. I think you'd really like that, bud.
Well, there you have it, everybody. That was part one of a two-part series of my interview with Pastor Steve Kelly of Wave Church in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Be sure to catch part two in our next episode of the Leader Lift podcast, soon to be renamed the Pound for Pound Principle podcast, or the Pound for Pound podcast. And if you're looking for more leadership resources, be sure to check out my site at mikehai.tv. And there you can pick up my 10-year anniversary leadership edition book of the Pound for Pound Principle. And you can also access for a limited time the instant replays of our two recent Pound for Pound online summits, one that we did in the United States of America and another that we did in South Africa at mikehai.tv. God bless you. Hope you have an amazing week, and I'll see you the next time at the Pound for Pound Leadership Podcast.